Humanity, Chapter 14, Part 3, Communal Organizations. Like shamanism, communally organized religions have no full-time specialists who make their living as religious practitioners. They do have leaders, often elderly persons or individuals with a special interest in the result of a ritual, who manipulate symbolic objects or address spiritual beings. Communal rituals are held to intercede with the supernatural on behalf of some group of people, such as a kin group, an age group, a village, or a caste. To illustrate, we consider two widespread kinds of communal rituals organized by decent groups: ancestral rituals and rites of passage. Ancestral rituals. Most worldviews that people have a spiritual dimension, a soul, that lives on after the physical body has perished. Beliefs about the fate of the soul after death vary widely. Some people, such as Hindus and Buddhists, believe souls are reincarnated into another person or animal. Others hold that souls pass into a spiritual plane, where they exist eternally with a community of other souls and have no further effect on the living. Still, others believe souls can become malevolent after death, turning into ghosts that cause accidents or sickness or terrifying the living, and so have to be appeased in some way. Another common belief about the fate of souls after death is that they interact with and affect their living descendants. The many peoples who hold such beliefs perform rituals to induce the spirits of their deceased ancestors to do favors for them, or simply to leave them alone. Beliefs and rituals surrounding the interactions between the living and their departed relatives are called ancestral rituals or ancestor veneration. China and other parts of East Asia are famous for ancestor veneration. In the past, and among many families today, patrilineally extended families in China kept tablets and shrines in a prominent place in the house. Printed or engraved on the tablets were the names of the deceased males of the family or lineage, providing a kind of reminder of their existence in the afterlife. Periodically, often even daily, the men of the house and their wives and children gathered and prayed at the shrine. Offerings would be made to ensure the contentment of ancestral spirits in the afterlife, including food, clothing, and ghost money. Purchased pieces of paper that were ritually burned so that the ancestors would receive and use them like real money in the afterlife. The Lugbar of Uganda provide an example. The patrilineage is an important social group to their Lugbara lineage. Elders oversee the interests and harmony of the entire group. They serve as the guardians of the lineage's morality. Although they have no power to punish violations physically, the Lugbara believe the spirit of a deceased person may become an ancestral spirit of her or his lineage. The spirit punishes living descendants who violate Lugbara ideals of behavior toward lineage mates. People who fight with their kinsmen, especially their older relatives, who deceive or steal from their lineage mates, or who fail to carry out their duties toward others, are liable to be punished by a spirit. Sometimes this happens because the spirit sees an offense committed and makes the offender ill. More commonly, spirits do not act on their own initiative to make someone sick. Rather, they act on the thought of an elder who is indigent because of the actions of some lineage mate. John Middleton describes Lugbara beliefs. Excuse me. Here's the vocabulary word for this section. Sorry. Lugbara about the power of lineage elders to cause illness by invoking ancestral spirits. The elder sits near his shrine in his compound and thinks about the sinner's behavior. His thoughts are known by the spirits, and then they send sickness to the offender. He, quote, thinks these words are in his heart, unquote, he does not threaten or curse the offender. For a senior man to do this is part of his expected role. It is part of his work to, quote, cleanse the lineage home, unquote. Indeed, an elder who does not do so, when justified, would be lacking in sense of duty toward his lineage. In Lugbara, we see how elders maintain harmony and corporation in the lineage by invoking the power of deceased members. This is a common feature of ancestral rituals. Matrilineal peoples have similar ways of recognizing and appeasing ancestors. Consider the Ndimbu of Zambia. When the Ndimbu women experiences fertility problems, people often say that she is forgetting her ancestors or doing something disapproved by an ancestress. The cure consists of a lengthy ritual in which many members of the matrilineage make the victim, quote, remember her relative. Why do some societies have rituals devoted to spirits of deceased ancestors? Like other, quote, why questions, this one is controversial. Many anthropologists agree, however, that such beliefs are related to the degree of importance of large, well-defined kin groups in a society. The greater the importance of kin groups, such as lineages and clans, in making public decisions, regulating access to resources, allocating roles, controlling behavior, and so on, the more likely a society is to develop rituals that control or worship ancestors. This is consistent with sociological interpretations of the religion and worldview. Rite of passage. Rites of passage of some kind are universal in human cultures. Every people celebrate or symbolically mark the stages of life as defined by their culture, birth, and death. The beginning and end. Here's the vocabulary word. The beginning and end of life are nearly everywhere marked by some kind of ritual process. Most peoples also celebrate transitions between life at stages such as puberty, marriage, childbirth, and entry into some new role or position. Rites of passage have long been a major area of field research in anthropology. Some rites of passage are the initiation rituals, which incorporate males and or females into new roles or into new social groups. They are especially well studied, partly because strange and sometimes painful things occur during them. Initiation rituals, ceremony recognize or often culturally are believed to cause bodily changes between childhood and adulthood, often around the time of sexual maturation, which is why they are popularly called puberty rites. Male initiation rituals are common on all continents. However, in some societies, in the interior mountains of New Guinea, they often involve psychological trauma and considerable physical pain. Among some New Guinea tribes, the process of making a man out of a boy takes many years. A group of boys nearing puberty goes through the initiation ritual sequence together as a cohort of age mates. Typically, they are removed from their mothers and contact with all females is severely restricted. They go to reside with the adult men in the communal men's house of the village where they will sleep for most of the rest of their lives and into which they must be initiated, unquote. Usually the ritual occur in several stages with different events happening to the boys at each stage. At different stages, The boys are initiated into manhood by undergoing trauma and pain. Commonly, adult men berate them for their misdeeds or weaknesses, make them go without water for long periods, force them to eat unpalatable foods, beat them with switches, place sticks in their noses to induce bleeding, and make cuts on their penises. The various stages frequently take 10 or more years before the boys are completed men, ready for marriage and fatherhood, hard physical labor, war, and politicking. Applying Solsey's idea, young men in these societies certainly make substantial sacrifices to signal their commitment to the ideals of manhood in these societies. Fewer societies make attainment of adulthood for girls into an initiation ritual. Some say this is because the physical signs of maturity are more obvious in the female body, so it is less essential for them to be socially recognized and proclaimed. Whatever the reason where they occur, initiation rites for females most often emphasized attainment of physical maturity, instruction in sexual matters and childbearing, and reminders of adult duties as wives and mothers. Mescalero Apache are one Native American people who have ceremonies that recognize and celebrate girls' attainment of puberty. Each year around the 4th of July, the people celebrate the attainment of womanhood. In a ceremony that lasts 4 days and 4 nights, Apache girls in the region who have had their first menses in their last year go to a place where a large teepee is erected. During the ceremony, the girls are regarded as reincarnations of white, painted women, a spiritual being who gave many good things to the people. The girls are blessed by singers, specialists who have gone through lengthy training and to learn the stories and chants, and by their relatives and friends. Those attending participate in traditional songs and dances dedicated to the 4 directions and the spirits associated with them. The Apache ceremony places a lot of emphasis on the girls becoming the mothers of the tribe. Perhaps because the Apache are matrilineal people, on the 4th day, singers recount the history of the Apache, and the girls are reminded of their ancestry and obligations. The ceremony honors the girls as individuals, reaffirms their commitment to the community, and vice versa, urges them to act responsibly, and upholds and recreates Apache traditions annually. According to the ethnographer Claire Farrer, almost invariably the girls report having been changed not only into social women, but also at a very basic level. They are ready to put aside their childhoods and become full members of their tribe and community. The ceremony thus helps the girls make social transition to adulthood with all its rights and responsibilities. Like ancestor veneration, rites of passage are communal rituals. They require cooperation by the members of a group to achieve socially valuable goals. Other communally organized rituals. 2 kinds of communal religious organizations are widespread and deserve brief description: totemism and seasonal rituals. Totemism is the belief that human groups have a special mystical relationship with natural objects such as animals, plants, and sometimes non-living things. The object or objects with which a group is associated is known as its totem. The group most often is a unilineal kin group, such as a clan. The totem frequently serves as the name of the group, for example, the Bear Clan, the Eagle Clan, the Sun Clan. The nature of the relationship between the members of the group and its totem varies widely. Sometimes the totem is used simply to identify the group and its members, much like our surnames. Often a mystical association exists between the group and its totem object. People believe they are like their totem in some respects, or the totem may be used as a symbol of differences between clans. In many populations, most notably some of the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, the members of a clan believe that their totem produced their ancestors in a mythical period. Seasonal rituals are usually believed to control natural processes and seasonal rhythms. Eastern Pueblo peoples who have lived along the Rio Grande of New Mexico for hundreds of years organize agricultural, hunting, fertility, and other rituals by season. The same rituals occurred in the same sequence year after year, and the same ceremonial groups are responsible for organizing and staging them. They require large scale cooperation by an entire community, bringing people together several times a year for a common purpose. Believed to benefit all, other Pueblo peoples have seasonal rituals and special ceremonial groups that organize them. Although the details vary from people to people, all these examples show why many kinds of communally organized rituals are also called rites of solidarity. The rituals have con- conscious purposes respecting ancestors, marketing and or causing transition from one stage of life to the next. Controlling nature, in addition, they provide a ritual means to strengthen and maintain good relationships among the group's members. Also, in most cases, those who lead them are supposed to have good character and to remain pure around the days of the performance, thus upholding values, norms, and other kinds of cultural standards. Ecclesiastical organizations. In Chapter 7, we described how occupational specialization accompanied the development of civilization and states. Civilization and states developed in the Old World cities of ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, East Asia, and India. They also grew among New World. Let me go ahead and so you can get the vocabulary. So they also grew among New World peoples such as ancient Inca, Aztec, and Maya. In these regions, specialization extended into religious dimension of cultural systems rather than organizing rituals on a communal basis, in which a wide range of people controlled and participated in the performance. A formal bureaucracy of religious specialists controlled many public rituals. The religious bureaucracy probably also had a large voice in formulating religious laws, which prescribed certain kinds of punishments for those who violated them. In this type of religious organization, the specialist is known as a priest. It is instructive to contrast priests with shamans in addition to their more specialized status. Priests differ from shamans in several respects. First, with the exception of people like the Zuni, shamans are not organized as a group, and cooperation between them typically is minimal. Indeed, many peoples believe that enemy shamans engage in supernatural battles with each other, with the stronger shaman winning the battle, resulting in either the recovery or death of the sick person. In contrast, priests are hierarchy organized and are usually subsidized and supported by a formal government, either by the high ranking chiefs of a large chiefdom or by the state, see chapter 2, or by the state. Second, priests undergo a lengthy period of formal training because they must master the complex rituals needed to perform their role. Third, the priests were at or near the top of the social ladder. In ancient civilizations, so individuals, priests, lived much better than the population at large. Fourth, shamans typically perform mainly crisis rituals whenever some person requires their healing or other kinds of services. The rituals at which priests officiate tend to be calendrical. They occur at regular intervals because the powerful gods that the rituals appease demand regular praise or sacrifice. A final difference is especially revealing with the development of a priesthood comes a strong distinction between priest and layperson. The layperson has little control over the timing of religious performances. The population at large relies on priests to keep it in the proper relationship to supernatural powers. This creates a sense of spiritual dependence on the priests and on the state apparatus that so often sponsors it, a dependence that tends to reinforce and legitimize the high degree of stratification found in states. These state sponsored rituals are called ecclesiastical, meaning of or pertaining of to the church, because the priests were highly organized and often formed a bureaucratic like group, and their rituals were usually held in grand buildings that served as temples. The organization of ecclesiastical religions was largely under the control of the government. State officials extracted tribute or taxes to finance the construction of temples, the livelihood of the priests, sacrifices that often accompanied state rituals, and other expenses needed to support and organize religious activities on a fantastically large scale. There is little question that ecclesiastical organizations provided rituals, myths, and beliefs that supported the domination of the ruling family or dynasty. See Chapter 13 for more on ideologies. The content of the beliefs, myths, and rituals most invariably express the dependence of the entire population on the ruler's well-being and on the periodic performance of rituals. A common belief of official state religions is that the ruler is a god king. He not only rules by divine mandate, but also is himself a god or somehow has divine qualities. This was true of most of the ancient civilizations and of the states that developed in sub-Saharan Africa. The complex chiefdoms of Polynesia and the Americas had comparable ideas. The ancient complex chiefdoms of Hawaii had marked social distinctions between the noble and commoner classes. The nobility was viewed as endowed with a supernatural power called mana, which we discussed earlier in this chapter. Mana was partly hereditary, and within a single family, the eldest child inherited the most mana from his or her parents. The highest ranking male noble, the paramount chief, was believed to be descended from one of the gods of the islands. This descent gave him the right to rule because he had more mana than anyone in the chiefdom. Other nobles, lesser chiefs, and their families were relatives of the the paramount chief, and thus were endowed with mana. Mana gave chiefs the power to curse those who were disloyal or disobedient, or who violated some taboo, which further reinforced their authority. Hawaiians believed the prosperity of a chiefdom and everyone in it depended on the performance of certain religious rituals held in grand temples. Because commoners did not have enough mana to enter a temple, only priests and nobles could perform the rituals needed to ensure prosperity. Everyone in the chiefdom thus relied on the social and religious elite for their well-being. In ecclesiastical organizations, many rituals are held to keep the entire polity, I think it's polity, polity in a beneficial relationship with supernatural beings. For example, in the state religion of the ancient Aztecs, the gods had to be periodically appeased or they would cease, or they would cause the world to end in cataclysm. To keep the gods' goodwill, the priesthood periodically performed human sacrifice at temples, offering the heart of the victim, usually a war captive, to the deities. Aztec priests also struck sharp thorns into their tongues, earlobes, and even genitals as blood offerings to the gods. The ancient Egyptians believed their pharaoh would rule in the afterlife just as in the present world. So when he died, he took much of his wealth, his wives, and his servants into the next world with him. Japanese believed the emperors of their nation were descended from the sun goddess from about 2,500 years ago. In later Japanese history, the emperors were so set apart from the mundane world that political affairs were handled by the shogun, the secular power who ruled in the name of the emperor. The emperor of old China, who was at various times in the history of Chinese civilization the most powerful man on the planet, ruled as long as he had the mandate of heaven. Organizing ecclesiastical rituals on a grand scale required enormous resources to construct temples, make offerings at sacrificial altars, support priests, and enforce religious laws. However, such state sponsored rituals did not necessarily wipe out other kinds of local level rituals. Commoners usually continued to rely on local shamans to cure them, practiced magic, believed in witches and sorcerers, and worshipped their ancestors. In ancient China, Korea, and Japan, for example, each household and lineage continued to revere its own ancestors through communal rituals and to make offerings to them at family shrines. In Korea, female shamans help families cope with anxieties and stresses. Even today, among some Christian families, in medieval Europe, Catholicism was ecclesiastical. The authority of church was tightly interwoven with the exercise of secular power, although conflict often arose between popes and various kings. Only in the past few centuries has the formal alliance between the power of government and the will of the gods been broken for any length of time. We should not assume that even this official separation between church and state will necessarily be permanent, as the recent history of Iran suggests intermingling of political and ecclesiastical authorities can be established in the modern world. Revitalization movements. So far, we have discussed religion in cultures that are changing slowly. When a people's way of life or physical survival is threatened by contact with powerful outsiders, often they seek the aid and protection of supernatural. They may form and join a social movement called a revitalization movement. Revitalization movements are most likely to occur when three conditions coalesce. I don't know that word. I'm sorry. 1. Rapid change, usually caused by exposure to unfamiliar people, customs, and objects. 2. Foreign domination or widespread fear of foreign domination, which leads to a sense of social, ethnic, or even racial inferiority. 3. The perception of relative deprivation, meaning that people sense they lack wealth, power, and esteem relative to those who dominate them. Historically, revitalization movements were especially common during colonialism, in which a foreign power subjected an indigenous people. Colonialism, it did not always lead to revitalization movements. However, revitalization movements usually originate with an individual, a prophet, who claims to have had a dream or vision. Sometimes the prophet claims to be a savior, a messiah sent by a spiritual being to save the world from destruction in the dream or a vision. The prophet received a message, a revelation from God, an ancestor, or another spiritual power. Revelations typically include two kinds of information given by the Spirit or spirits and taught by the prophet. The first is a statement about what is wrong with the present day world, about why people's lives have changed for the worse. Prophets and followers commonly blame the introduction of corruption, foreign objects, and habits such as tobacco, alcohol, money, new religions, formal schooling, the relaxation of old moral standards for the troubles of today. Second, revelations usually include a vision of a new world and a prescription for how to bring it about. In some cases, the message is vague and secular, with the prophet claiming that earthly lives will improve if people or stop doing certain things. However, the message is often apocalyptic. The prophet says the present world will end at a certain time, and only those who heed the prophet's message will be saved. The expulsion or death of foreigners is a frequent theme of apocalyptic foreigner visions. Foreigners will be drowned in a flood, burned in a fire, swallowed by an earthquake, or killed by deities or ancestors. Another common theme is the reversal of existing political and economic dominance in relations. Foreigners will work for us. We will have the wealth instead of them, and we will tax them and make laws that they must obey. Nearly always, the prophet's revelations are syncretic. That is, they combine elements of traditional myths, beliefs, and rituals with introduced elements. The following examples from two religions illustrate revitalization movements. Malaysian cargo cults. The area called Melanesia in the southwestern Pacific experienced numerous revitalization movements in the early to mid 20th century. Melanesians traditionally placed great cultural value on wealth and its distribution as the means to become a big man or influential leader. See Chapter 13. The value Melanesians placed on wealth led them to be interested in the material possessions of German, English, French, and Australian colonial powers, because European wealth was brought to the islands by ship or plane. It became known as cargo, and the various movements that sprang up with the aim of acquiring it through ritual means are commonly known as cargo cults. To Melanesians, the Europeans they saw were fantastically wealthy, yet the Melanesians seldom saw them do any work to earn their possessions. Europeans who lived in the islands certainly did not know how to construct trucks, produce canned foods, build radios or kerosene lanterns or stoves, and so forth. In many traditional Melanesian religion, technology was believed to have been given to people by deities or spirits. It followed logically that European objects came from their god. Furthermore, when the Europeans who lived in Melanesia wanted some new object, they simply made marks on paper and placed them in an envelope or asked for the object by speaking into metal things, radios. Some weeks later, the object was delivered in ships or airplanes. Surely spirits had made the cargo, and the actions of Westerners to persuade their spirits to send cargo or rituals. Melanesians, therefore, believed that they too could acquire this wealth through the correct ritual procedure, which they frequently believed Europeans were selfishly withholding from them. Numerous prophets sprang up among diverse Melanesian peoples, each with his own vision or dream, each with his own story to explain why the Europeans had cargo and the Melanesians had none, and each claiming to know the secret ritual that would deliver their goods. The prophet often claimed to have received a visit from an ancestor or a native deity who told him that the whites had been lying to people. The Garia of the north coast of Papua New Guinea illustrate common themes of cargo cults. Missionaries came to Garia in the early 20th century, and the Garia initially adopted Christianity for reasons other than those the missionaries had in mind. They assumed missionaries knew the ritual secrets that were the road to cargo, unquote. In Garia tradition, deities and other spirits had secret names and would give benefits to people who knew them. The missionaries would give cargo to the Garia if only they practiced what the missionaries preached: church attendance, monogamy, worship of the Western God, and cessation of pagan practices such as sorcery and dancing based on their belief that the missionary lifestyle and Christian rituals held a secret of cargo. Many Garia converted to Christianity early in the 20th century. Still, the cargo did not arrive. The Garia grew angry as they concluded that missionaries and other Europeans were withholding the true ritual secrets of how to get cargo to keep all the wealth for themselves. In the 1930s and 1940s, two Garia prophets arose. They told the people that the missionaries had been lying to them. God and Jesus were both really deities of the Garia, not of the whites. Only the Europeans knew the secret names of God and Jesus and asked them for the cargo with secret prayers. All along, Jesus had been trying to deliver the goods to the Garia, but the Jews were holding him captive in heaven. To free him, the Garia had to perform sacrificial rituals to show him how poor they were and to make him feel sorry for them. They had to destroy all their native wealth objects. If they did these things, Jesus would give the cargo to the ancestral spirits of the Garia, who would in turn deliver it to the living. Sorry, I'm not supposed to comment. Anyway, Native American movements. Revitalization movements also occurred among Native Americans whose sufferings at the hands of white traders, settlers, armies, and administrators are well documented. Two movements were especially important, both precipitated by a deterioration of tribal economic, social, and religious life. Handsome Lake. In the 1600s and 1700s, the Seneca people of New York, Pennsylvania, were one of the members of a loose confederation of tribes who agreed to live in peace and come to one another's aid in case of attack by surrounding tribes. The Seneca traditionally were matrilineal horticulturalists. Men hunted, traded furs, and went on raids against neighboring tribes. Women owned most of the farmland and did most of the planting and harvesting of corn and other crops. By 1800, the Seneca had lost most of their land to the new state of New York. Euro-American settlers and land speculators, whites, committed many atrocities against them in the 1780s and 1790s. Partly because most Seneca supported the British during the American Revolutionary War. Devastating diseases such as smallpox and measles, which wiped out millions of Native Americans all over the continent, reduced the tribe to a fraction of its former numbers. Seneca men had been proud warriors and hunters, but these activities became more difficult because of the loss of land and the presence of whites. The American government waged psychological warfare against them. intentionally corrupting their leaders with bribes and liquor, and generally attempting to dehumanize and demoralize them. Seneca men turned to alcohol and drank away most of what little money they could still earn from the fur trade. Neighboring peoples who once feared the Seneca and other members of the League of the Iroquois ridiculed them. Witchcraft accusations increased internal conflicts and divisions within their communities. Many women lost their desire for children and took medicines that caused them to abort or become sterile altogether. A way of life, and perhaps an entire people, was dying. In 1799, a Seneca man named Handsome Lake lay sick. Three angels cured him and gave him a revelation from the Creator. Handsome Lake reported that the Creator was saddened by the life of the people and angry because of their drunkenness, witchcraft, and use of abortion medicines. The Seneca must repent such deeds. Handsome Lake had two more visions during the next year. He prophesied an apocalypse in which the world would be destroyed by great drops of fire, consuming those who did not heed his teachings. People could save themselves and delay the apocalypse by publicly confessing their wrongs, giving up sins such as witchcraft and drinking, and performing certain traditional rituals. The apocalypse did not occur, but Handsome Lake was able to give his teachings a new secular twist between 1803 and his death in 1815. He continued to preach temperance because he said the Creator had never intended whiskey to be used by Native Americans. He encouraged peaceful relations with both whites and other Native peoples. He urged that the scattered reservations of the Seneca be consolidated so that the people could live together as one community. Family morality must be impeccable. Sons were to obey their fathers. Divorce, commonplace among the matrilineal Seneca and in Aboriginal times, was no longer allowed, and adultery and domestic quarreling were to cease. Handsome Lake also succeeded in changing traditional division of labor, in which women cultivated the crops and men who worked in the garden were considered effeminate. Effeminate. I don't know that word either. Seneca men took up farming and animal husbandry, and even fenced their fields and added new crops to their inventory. I'm going to go ahead and do the religious diversity in the United States. So you can read that at your leisure. Peyote religion. Peyote is a cactus that grows in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas and northern Mexico. When eaten, it produces a mild narcotic effect. The ritual use of peyote among northwestern Mexican natives predated European conquest. However, its consumption as the central element in a revitalization movement dates only from the last 2 decades of the 19th century. In 1875, two southern plains tribes of the Kiowa and Comanche lost their land after military defeats. During their confinement to reservations in southwestern Oklahoma, the Lipan Apache introduced them to peyote. By the 1880s, a revitalization movement began after the two tribes began consuming peyote at religious services. Like many movements, peyoteism is subsequently spread, reaching about 19 Native American groups in Oklahoma by 1899. During the early 20th century, the church spread rapidly to other Native communities throughout the western United States and Canada. The peyote religion was and is syncretic, adopting many elements of Christian theology and worship along with the consumption of peyote as sacrament. The peyote movement had no single prophet or leader. Local churches developed their own versions of services and rituals. One early leader was John Wilson, a Caddo, Delaware from western Oklahoma, who had learned to ingest peyote from the Comanche. While eating dinner in the early 1890s, Wilson collapsed. Thinking him dead, his family began preparations for the burial. But a Caddoan named Enoch Parker told the family that he had learned in a vision that Wilson was not dead. Indeed, Wilson revived 3 days later. He reported that a great water bird had sucked the breath and sin out of his body, causing his collapse. Jesus brought him back to life after 3 days, telling him that his sins had been removed and that he was to teach the Native American people to believe in God and to use peyote to communicate with him. Until his death in 1901, Wilson proselytized the peyote religion among the Osage, Delaware, Kuapa, and other Native American peoples of the area. He preached that they needed to believe in God and Jesus, work hard, act morally, and stop drinking alcohol. They were to abandon their traditional religious practices because the spirits that formerly aided them could be used for evil as well as good purposes. Wilson attracted a large number of adherents among the Osage who combined the use of peyote in worship services with the Christian teachings they had learned. In mission schools, many movements provided meaning and more moral direction to Native Americans during a period of rapid and mostly harmful change. The peyote religion continues today on many reservations, especially in the central and western United States. It was legally incorporated as an official church, now known as the Native American Church. In 1918, those who follow the peyote road eat pieces of the cactus during services, treating it as a deeply meaningful sacrament. Many members of the Native American Church say that the Creator intended peyote to be used by them. Periodically, the legislators of some states have tried to outlaw the use of peyote because the cactus is legally banned substance defined by the wider society as a dangerous drug. So far, courts have upheld the right of church members to consume peyote as part of their religious sacraments. Fate of revitalization movements. What ultimately happens to the revitalization movements, many with apocalyptic messages, simply appear when the end of the world does not occur. Other movements have been remarkably tenacious. In Melanesia, certain areas saw the rise and fall of numerous prophets, each claiming to have the cargo secret. People followed again and again because they had no other acceptable explanation for cargo. For why whites had it and they lacked it, or for how they could acquire it. Certainly their own worldly efforts working for Europeans in mines and plantations, growing and selling coffee, copra, cocoa, and so forth, did not reward them with the fantastic wealth that whites enjoyed with virtually no effort. Most cargo cults disappeared when the prophecies failed. However, in some regions, cargo cults became political movements or parties. This happened among the Garia, Manus, Tanis, and some Malaysians. Other movements do not end suddenly, wither away or transform into a more secular political movement. They retain their religious character, frequently teaching that contentment is to be found within oneself rather than in worldly material things. After his death in 1815, Handsome Lake's teachings became codified as the Code of Handsome Lake and was influential into modern times. Peyotism also became formally organized, like many other revitalization movements that give birth to new religions. The adherents of peyotism are thus far largely confined to a single ethnic category, Native Americans. Other movements grow over the centuries from humble beginnings. They eventually attract millions of believers. They develop a formal organization and religious specialist called priest, including priests, pastors, and the like, replace prophets. The ancient prophets and disciples become the founders of the religion. Their lives take on mythical proportions, and their revelations become texts that are considered sacred by believers. Followers become organized into an institutionalized church which formalizes and codifies the text so that they become official doctrines and creeds. The teachings and rituals cross national and ethnic boundaries. Beliefs and rituals go from being local to being national to sometimes being global. Most of the major religions of the modern world began as revitalization movements, including Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. These religions are sometimes called world religions because they have spread outside their original homelands. Today, more and more people are becoming familiar with world religions, not just through books and TV documentaries, but also through firsthand experience. Globalization brings old religions to new places, raising issues of how to accommodate religious pluralism. See global challenges and opportunities feature. Here is the summary of the chapter so that you can read that at your leisure. And that is the end of chapter 14, part 3. Thank you.